Hey everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of our Metroid 35th anniversary celebration. If you missed part 1, make sure to check it out using the link in the description below, in which we covered all the 2D Metroid games. But this time, in part 2, we'll be focusing on all the 3D games, including Metroid Primes 1, 2, and 3, and all the spin-offs, including Other M. If that counts as a spin-off, I'm not even sure. Anyways, with that, let's get to it. Well, speaking of which, let's move on to Metroid Prime, and maybe we'll just kind of like talk about the whole series so we don't have to go through them all one by one. This is going longer than I thought it would a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, Metroid Prime is awesome.
So
in short.
It's,
So great. It really does what Super Metroid did in 3D. I think even better in many ways. I haven't played it super recently, so it'll be fun to go back once I finish most of the 2D games. And see if my full thoughts still agree. But yeah, I just thought it was great. Awesome atmosphere. Gunplay felt great. It did some stuff that no other games were really doing at the time. Like, yeah, it was a shooter game, but it wasn't about shooting so much. It was a Metroid game still. A first-person adventure, as they called it then. Amazing atmosphere. Really no other characters besides Samus. And exploring was so satisfying in that game, where you had these fully 3D environments. You didn't have to do like the pseudo-random bomb, wall bombing they had to do in the other Metroids, because there was almost always something hinting toward, what you needed to do next, whether an object or like using the scanning feature to tell you about the game, and it just had a great feel to it. Like I even on the even with Metroid Prime Trilogy, I still prefer the GameCube controller than the Wii remote. I just love how it feels with the GameCube controller. You don't need to look around, like up and down that much. The game was designed with that in mind, and it just felt fantastic on the controller. And including with the morph ball, I just loved how rolling around worked, including once you got the boost ball function. It just all feels great. Like, that game is just like everything coming together at once for like what's almost a perfect experience.
Yeah, I wish I played that game first and when it came out. I didn't play it until like I think 2006, 2005, I don't remember. But like I think I took for granted, first of all, I was also like 10 or 11 years old, so I didn't really care much about like, oh, it's revolutionary. But I really
that'd be Metroid Prime 3 on the Revolution.
Yes, on the Nintendo.
Right.
Exactly. Now that's a game I felt like was revolutionary, unironically. But I don't think I really just appreciated just how this game was gonna hold up like 10, 15 years later. Like visually, it still looks good. Yeah. People always say like realistic graphics don't age well, which is true often, but like this does. Like, it is still sort of stylized, of course, but there's just you'd be hard pressed to believe that this game had probably like a really messed up, definitely had a really messed up development cycle, 8 months of crunch time, people not knowing what the heck they were doing, and then they accidentally made one of the greatest games of all time.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. It's not a perfect game. The backtracking is a mess, and finding the Chosen artifacts was a pain. Even the bosses, when I played that game recently, I was like, oh, the bosses in this there's not a lot of them, and most of them are kind of underwhelming. But other than that, like, this game is revolutionary, and the fact that so many games have taken inspiration from this one in particular just goes to show, like, it's going to have a lasting legacy for ages to come.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny, I've been streaming Metroid Prime actually on my Twitch page, and it's like people are coming into the Twitch chat, and when I say that, oh, this game's almost 20 years old, they're like blown away because of how good it still looks. And they're like, what? It's that old? Like, yeah, this game came out in 2002. But it's actually, I would argue that I don't mind.
Yep.
Yeah, it's true. I don't mind like a lot of the backtracking and Chosen artifact stuff, because I think it plays into the strength of the game, which is exploring this open world. And I do agree, Andre. I like the GameCube controller better because it feels like it was more. It was designed around that controller in mind, and the game's pacing is a little bit more melancholic, a little less action-packed, and more about taking the time to take in your surroundings and see what's around you and use those environmental sort of cues to find your way around, even if those cues are sometimes just a straight-up half-pipe. But I think that controller scheme really lends itself to that gameplay style really nicely. The Wii controls are good as well, but I don't know. I mostly just like the widescreen on the Trilogy version to get more of that view of your environment.
And you just flick the Wii remote up to bounce in the bouncy ball.
That's really useful, actually, especially for some of those morph ball puzzles, or just hopping into like the bomb slots that are in the wall. You just roll up to it, just whoop, hop in. It's very, very satisfying to do. But yeah, it's it's this really incredible, sort of very immersive experience. And as I've been replaying, because the first time I played it in a probably good 6 years, I'm surprised at how much reading there is, and how much I'm loving reading all this stuff. Like I'm totally the kind of person that gets pulled into like game lore, and just like reading all the pirate logs and the Chozo lore and stuff in there is just, it's such fantastic world building with some of the stuff that's written there. Yeah.
That scan visor is revolutionary. Not many games have used something like that in a long time. They still have logbook entries that you don't require like scanning and stuff. For like Doom Eternal, for example, there's a lot of lore in there too. Most recent game I can think of. But yeah, just having that scan visor was wow. Like the whole world was just laid out in front of you. Even the littlest things had stuff to say about them. That was just wow.
But what's great about it as well is that I think it plays, like having the scan visor plays into this sort of idea of having different gameplay styles. Say like I'm the kind of person who wants to stop and read every single little thing. I can do that. And if someone else doesn't care and they don't want to, they just don't have to. They can just keep walking. They don't even have to turn on the visor to see the little nodes. They can just keep going and go about how they prefer to play. And I think that's really clever design. Yeah.
Here's my problem: is I'm the person, I don't want to read all of them, but I do anyway. and it does slow down the game, unfortunately. That's a downside. Is I'm compelled to read them all.
Scan visor was far more entertaining to me than probably what it should have been, but yeah, reading about the lore and seeing what happened, the build up to bosses and things, or reading about what was the last boss called? Like an Omega Metroid, or
Metroid
or
Prime.
Omega Pirate?
Metroid Prime, right?
Or Metroid Prime.
That obviously the thing that the game's named after.
Who's the main character in Super Mario Brothers again? He's like a plumber, and
his name is Super.
He's Super. Yeah, he's just Super. He's got a brother named Brothers. But that part, is really interesting, well written, and probably a way to cut down on development time, because if they did cutscenes for everything, that would have made it take even longer to make. But I would say Metroid Prime 1 and even 2, in a way, such snappy GameCube controls probably slightly ruined Metroid Prime 3 for me at the time, because it took me maybe longer to get used to motion control games. So I definitely loved the GameCube controller more. Just how snappy it was. Like, you think of how you move around in Doom Eternal and how good it is. This is kind of a predecessor. I can't even say it. Yeah. One before it.
Yep.
It's hot. There's no AC on right now. My brain's frying.
I hear you.
And just how well it was done at the time for jumping, the movements. It was translated over to a first-person shooter really well when really people were extremely skeptical and thought, what the heck is Nintendo doing? This should be a third-person game.
That's a great point. It was kind of like the Titanic of video games at the time. Everyone thought it was going to crash and burn when it during its development cycle, and it came out and it blew away critics at least. It wasn't a huge. It sold well. It wasn't an amazing seller. But yeah, no, it was. I think anyone who played it everyone who played it appreciated it for what it was, which is a great, well-made, well-constructed game. And there were a couple points I wanted to touch on real quick. One. Was just as an example of how well designed the game is. Like, even the loading is just brilliantly done with how the elevator sequences disguise loading, or even the conventional Metroid doors you shoot open disguise loading. Like, if you shoot a door a little bit too early, it won't open quite right away because it hasn't loaded the next zone yet, and that's just genius. I love that.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I'm gonna throw it out there, the entire Metroid Prime series, This has the best Samus. I hate anime Samus. I love realistic woman Samus that we have here, actually I was gonna say you only see at the end. That's not true, because you see her reflection every time you shoot in a dark area, which is another thing I want to touch on real quick. Is how far they went to make it feel like an immersive experience, where you have all those visor effects, where you see her light up in it, or you have fog, condensation catch on it, or raindrops pelting it. It's just so well done. So.
Oh yeah, totally. Just the attention to detail that just goes to show, like it's those little things that make that reveal when a developer's not being lazy, which Metroid Dread has, because every time you run up to a wall, she like stops it with her hand. So like, yeah, I was like, okay, that's a little thing. Who cares? But then Chris Seaver said, hey, that's a good sign of a really good developer. Like, don't knock it.
Yeah. So to move on then to Metroid Prime 2 and 3, can kind of group these together. I don't think either of them quite strike the highs of the original, which is interesting because they arguably learned lessons from the first game, but there's just something about them that don't quite entrance me in the same way as Metroid Prime 1. I think it might partially because of the dark world of Metroid Prime 2. Yeah. To be fair, I need to replay the game. It's been a long time. But that just kind of felt like it just made the experience more convoluted than it needed to be, and kind of like took away from the purity of what, you know, the Metroid Prime or the Metroid experience. And then I like a lot of what Metroid Prime 3 did. I think the Wii Remote controls are probably the best, among the best done for a shooter, particularly when they came out, and probably perhaps still to this day. Having those pointer controls were great, and they actually felt good. You know, I love even using the nunchuck to like pull back shields or, you know, rip things off walls. It all felt really good. And then also I love, what was the Sky Town called? Elysia?
Elysia.
I remember that being like a really unique, almost like a proto Bioshock Infinite type thing, where you're even riding around sky rails. And I think that level, to my memory list, I remember that having like the most mind-blowing exhaust effects I'd seen. Like the exhaust on those floating platforms looked amazing. So I wonder if that still holds up to this day. But the downside was that it kind of had a little bit of what I was talking about with Metroid Fusion, to a greater degree, much greater degree, is they step back on the isolation feel because you have constant narration from like the computer guys, the brain computer things, the Omega units or whatever, and then you get other human characters too, including a really, for me at least, a really weird and out-of-place Halo-esque opening. Like it felt like they're trying to go for the bombastic Halo type of thing, but it just doesn't work for me in Metroid. I'm like, this is weird. Luckily you get past that soon enough. But they have other cool things they do, like, you know, different planets, and which feels a little bit like how the different sectors work in Metroid Fusion. And then also the fact that they actually incorporate the ship into the gameplay to some degree, which is neat. So and it's a game I would look forward to revisiting if they ever release an HD version of the collection. So
they have to. Like, here's the thing: they could release an HD version of the games that literally only increase the resolution and nothing else, and those games would still look better than most games out today. But anyway, Metroid Prime 2 was it did a lot of things better than Prime 1. The bosses were way more interesting. The power-ups you got were way cooler. I mean, I wouldn't say way cooler. You got most of the same items from Metroid Prime 1, but they added more in Metroid Prime 2 that were really cool. And the way the missions were structured I felt was better. Didn't require a whole lot of backtracking. Like, there was still backtracking, of course, but
it was like a hub and spoke model.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you still had to revisit other areas, but it wasn't like a pain to revisit them. There was a lot more shortcuts. But it's the case if you can't catch lightning in a bottle like more than once. Like, the Metroid Prime 1 was just, it's great because it was the first of its kind, and it's like Prime 2 and Prime 3 were kind of just more of the same. Although Prime 3 was definitely more of a focus on action, and you mentioned that the opening was a lot like Halo, and I think that was not on accident. I think they really were like trying to be like, okay, because Metroid had this thing where they would always release right next to Halo, and then Halo would just take over. So they were like, okay, we gotta be more like, we gotta be more like Halo, pretty much. But I still thought Prime 3 was great. Like, it is kind of annoying that it is more of a focus on action, and there's even like an escort mission where you have to escort some soldiers, which I thought was dumb. But it's still like it's still a really visually astonishing game. Like, I would even say Prime 3 looks better than Metroid Dread looks so far from what I've seen. Like, yeah, that might be a bold take, but Prime 3's art direction is probably the best out of the entire trilogy, in my opinion. Like, a lot of people, I think so, but I don't know. Prime 1, it's between Prime 1 and Prime 3, but I know Prime 3 has a lot of bloom, which a lot of people don't like, but I'm shamelessly, I love bloom. Like, I do.
Did the game make you say wow, as Iwata said it would? Or actually, as Wii graphics would?
Yes, I might have said something worse because I was 13 years old and with a potty mouth, but...
Oh, man. Yeah, any other thoughts on Metroid Prime 2 or 3?
Yeah, I think, sorry, Tom, did you want to go first there?
You can go first.
Yeah, okay. Sure, I think the big thing for me with Prime 1 versus 2 and 3 and why it stands out or holds its own better is part of the Metroid experience is sort of exploring in this isolation, but the interconnectedness of the world is, I think, really well done in Prime 1. And by sort of having the dual world system in Prime 2 and then the different planets, they sort of disjointed the level design between those places. Like, you have like these very distinct zones, but they can't be as interconnected because of that structure that they put forth. Like literally on different planets, you can't just walk over there, right? So part of that sort of idea of grandeur and spectacle kind of hampered the gameplay in some aspects. But the games have so much good going for them that, just because they're not as magical and amazing as Prime 1 doesn't mean they're bad by any stretch. They're absolutely phenomenal games. Except for the Spider Guardian in Prime 2. It's the worst boss fight of all time in any video game I've ever played.
Oh my gosh,
the
Spider Guardian is so bad. Like, oh man, I almost always, I like never die in Metroid games. I also like rarely play them on hyper mode. But like every time it's a Spider Guardian, I'm just like,
it's
we go.
A terrible boss fight, and there's so much lead up to it before there's so much space between the last save room and that boss fight as well. So you have to do so much backtracking to get back there if you die, and it's just horrid. Other than that, which is too bad because it's in this really great, the Sanctuary Fortress is a really great zone. I think it's a really incredibly artistic, creative area of the game. So other than that, I'd say that they're both amazing games. But just there's just like a little sense of magic that's missing, I think.
Yeah. What's the boss in the Sanctuary Fortress? The
Quadraxis.
Quadraxis is the
That's
goat.
a great boss fight. That's an amazing one. So they balance each other. So.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
I'll say for me quickly that Metroid Prime 2, I remember being a bit disappointed at the time just because of how sparse the other world was, like whatever the Dark World was. It felt like as well it kind of petered off towards the end of my memory instead of getting better. So in contrasting that with Metroid Prime 1, I was a bit disappointed at the time, but once again, like what Joey's saying, catching lightning in the bottle and expectations of a game being younger after like they set it so high.
Yeah, it's a little hard to top yourself in that way, which might have been why they waited 8 years after Super Metroid to try again.
Yeah,
they knew it was difficult. Just a couple more quick Metroid Prime 3 thoughts from myself. One, I hate the other characters, or at least their designs. I hate how they look.
What?
Stupid looking.
Oh, stop it.
Rundus is
all
a
of them.
great character.
The Federation Force looks like a bunch of dorks in their dumb suits, and I hate the energy woman, whatever her name is.
Gandrada?
Yeah, I hate them. Hate all of them. But that doesn't ruin the game for me. One thing I do like, though, that I think I liked, actually, I have to replay it. Maybe it wouldn't annoy me these days, but the whole corruption system, as I recall, or hyper mode, whatever the heck it was called.
Yeah,
you
hyper
could activate,
mode.
Yeah, and then, like, didn't it come at the expense of your health or something? Or like
It did.
Burn, yeah.
But even then,
Yeah.
it wasn't even... You get health pickups like crazy in that game. It's really not that big of a deal. But it also kind of just, like... I feel like you've been forced to use hyper mode a lot because a lot of the enemies are just really, really tough and, like, almost forced you to use hyper mode. Yeah, that was kind of another problem with Prime 3. I was just like... this hyper mode was fun when I was 13. It's not as fun now.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I would feel about it these days, but I at least like the idea of it. Like, the idea that you're using your own health as a power-up is kind of cool. It's a little bit evocative of F-Zero and how you boost using your health in the newer...
Ooh, yes.
Yeah, in those games. And then also, one thing that did improve in Metroid Prime 3 is the end game collectathon, basically, which in the previous two, you primarily had to do at the end of the game. You couldn't really collect most of the things you needed until you reached a certain point deep into the game. Whereas Metroid Prime 3 did rectify that. You could find the batteries you needed, a lot of them along the way, and you didn't need all of them to make it into to make it through the final ship where you use them to unlock doors. And so that definitely refined it, and I can appreciate that as one who did the guide for Metroid Prime 3 at GameSpot, I think it was. I did their guides. If you go back and read it, it should still be up. And I'm like, oh, this is way easier. Although I had to find them all anyway, I think, just to make the guide. But anyways. All right, so that's the Metroid Prime trilogy. Of course, there was also the trilogy that came out on Wii that retroactively added Wii remote controls to all of them. Although, so it's a great collection, and they added widescreen support, I think, as Danny said earlier. One thing that, one super tiny thing that annoys me about, though, besides the loss of the GameCube controller, is they also removed the water effects. When you shoot the water, you don't get the dynamic ripples anymore.
I knew you were going to say that before you even. Yep. It's worse. It's unequivocally worse. But we did forget. We did forget about 2 other Prime games, Andre.
The spin-offs.
Yep. Prime Pinball. You were going to go into them? Okay,
yeah,
good.
Pinball. How can we forget? I think that was the first Metroid spin-off entirely, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah.
And that game's great. I actually have, I think Tom remembers enjoying this game vicariously through me, because we were at TGS, what, 15 years ago or something, and something like that, and they had the lines were nuts. The lines were like hours long for everything, and I'm like, I can't deal with this. I'm tired of the lines. So I just sat down for 6 hours and just played Metroid Prime Pinball the entire time on my Nintendo DS. I'm like, oh, this game's great, and that kept me entertained the entire time. So, unfortunately, I lost my copy since. I need to go buy a new one or something. But yeah, that game was fun. It was way better than it had any right to be.
Are you gonna buy a new pinball copy for like $400 on eBay?
I probably won't.
I don't think they're that much, but still, they're redonkulously expensive. And I regret to say it, never played it.
Oh,
I have
as
never
a true
played it.
Metro Prime fan, you got it one of these days.
I'm a fake fan. What can I say? Fake fan alert right here. But, anyone else play pinball?
Only a little bit. One of my friends had it, but
Me?
yeah, well, no, another one here too. Probably didn't appreciate it enough at the time. Because it's like, what are they doing? That's what I thought, probably.
Yeah. Nintendo had that. Nintendo was on like that weird on the spin-off pinball train for a while. They had Kirby, they had Mario, they had Metroid Prime Pinball. Oh, Pokemon as well.
Odama.
Odama, yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, then there was also, of course, the most famous and best Metroid Prime game of all time, being Federation Force, which they announced by way of that soccer spin-off, the soccer mode in it.
Blast Ball.
Yeah.
Blast Ball.
It was Rocket League before Rocket League.
It was Rocket League after Rocket League.
Was it? Was it?
Yeah.
I don't remember when.
I'm pretty sure it was after Rocket League. It was way slower and bad.
I still played it better than Rocket League. So yeah, that was I never beat this game either. I played the first 3 or 4 levels and I'm just like, this isn't Metroid, and I turned it off. Like, I'm just like, this game would have been fine if it released like way sooner, like even if it came out right after Other M or something. But you release this game 6 years into a Metroid drought, you're gonna make fans angry. Like, that was one of the worst cases of just not playing it by ear, like, ever. It was just but you know, we're getting new Metroid games, so maybe I'll go back and beat it just because I know
I have to
at least we're
wonder
getting a real Metroid game.
If they had bothered to just even say like, oh, don't worry, we're working on Samus Returns, or not even name drop it, just say like, we're working on something else, don't worry, this is just to tie you over in the meantime. If, you know, the reaction would have been super different to how the game
100%.
was announced. Yeah.
That's why they end up announcing Metroid Prime 4 in the way that they did, was just so they could announce other games.
What? We didn't know we'd make Metroid fans mad announcing Federation Force. What? No, that never happens. Metroid fans never get angry. But, and I know this is a Metroid fan who gets angry all the time.
The interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, you can keep talking. I was going to transition to something else.
Okay, I was going to say, I have heard some people have actually enjoyed Federation Force. For myself, like, I was one who was able to put aside the fact that it wasn't a pure Metroid game, and I still didn't like it that much. It just felt like a pretty generic shooter to me. But I didn't play a whole lot of the multiplayer, so maybe people found more value in that than me. And so.
Yeah, well, you did forget one Prime game, Andre.
I know, Hunters.
Yes.
It occurred to me
That's right.
I guess that could be the first spin-off in a way. So
yeah, this I played this game last year again on my Wii U through the eShop, and I already forgot about it. Like, it's like it was revolutionary when it came out. It was just like, what, 3D Metroid on a handheld? That's wild. What? And then, but when you get past that, it's a really mediocre Metroid game. Yeah. It's just like the bosses, the enemies are super forgettable. The bosses are super forgettable. Like the only like bosses that are memorable are the hunters themselves, and it was mainly this game was mainly just designed to be a multiplayer Wi-Fi shooter, which I guess is pretty good. I never got my DS connected to the internet to try it out, but playing against bots it's okay, I guess. It's not a bad game, but it's just by Metroid standards, it doesn't hold up.
I think it really does exist, as you said, to show like you can, it's a 3D Metroid on DS. Like I remember, I think Tom was there with me at E3 when they announced it on stage, showing Metroid Prime running on DS. It's like, oh my god, that's amazing! Like, especially with a quick snippet we had and how far away we were from the screen, it made it look even more impressive. Like, it looked straight up like Metroid Prime on the DS. When you actually play it, you were like, it's not quite as impressive. It's still, impressive though. But yeah, the actual gameplay was whatever. I boarded that pretty quickly. It was cool as a technical showpiece. Not a great game though.
That's for sure.
Yeah,
and it kind of had an early. Sorry, real quick. It had an early version of the hand cramping Kid Icarus style controls.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Yep.
Preview of what's to come, and I believe a demo came with the original 3DS too. That's what I played of it.
No, DS, right? Yeah,
3DS. Yeah.
Is there? I feel like we're missing something. Is there another spin-off we're missing, or something else?
There's no other spin-off that I know, but I think we do have one more game to talk about.
Which one?
This one's not as controversial one bit at all. Metroid Other M came out in 2010, and it's the last new Metroid game we got. That was not a spin-off and not a remake.
Yep.
This game... Boy, Daniel, go first, because you're not as salty on this game as I am.
I'm not as salty, no. Although I did, part of my lack of salt, I never hated the game, but it certainly exists on the bottom of my list of Metroid games that I like, right? But, like, I've never wanted to go and revisit it, either. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's, but I recently saw a video talking about I think I sent you that video, actually, Joey. But it was talking about the localization of Other M, and a lot of the issues of the game are actually, particularly with the game's writing and its story, are exasperated in its localization and just aren't as severe in the Japanese version. And so, like, even Samus's characterization with this infatuation with Adam is just not as prevalent in the basically in the Japanese version, or the original version of the game. And there's a moment in the game which baffles me when I play the game, because you go into the super hot area and Samus starts taking damage from the heat. She's wearing her Varia suit, but she has to wait for Adam to tell her to turn on the Varia feature before she does. And in the Japanese version of the game, apparently the way it's played out is Samus is basically doing it intentionally as an FU to Adam. Basically, he's like, you can't use any of your power-ups without my authorization. She's like, okay, I'm gonna go into this super hot area and take damage then. How do you like that? And then he's like, okay, just do it, please. And so it's like her like stubbornness sort of shining through. And I think that kind of is neat, sort of in hindsight. And I think there is some good stuff to offer. I do actually like the idea of Samus not starting fresh and having all of her power-ups from the previous game on paper. I think that's pretty, it makes sense, because so many games have to sort of write an excuse in to take those away from her, whereas this game is just like, okay, well, she has them all from the start. She just won't use them until it's allowed, because a power bomb will literally kill everyone on the team. And so like that kind of thing makes some sense. It's just in execution, it's, especially in the Western version of the game, it just feels so disjointed from Samus's characterization, particularly at how it contrasts those in previous games. And when we were talking about Fusion earlier, like that issue is further exasperated. Fusion takes that stripping away of Samus's power and uses it to propel the story forward, build Samus's character, and lets you as the player, slowly gain more power and reclaim your agency. And Other M starts to do that, but then it never gives you the payoff in the end. You don't even really get to do like some of the boss fights yourself. So I don't know, it does fall short in a lot of ways, in my opinion. But I know there's some people who will defend it to the, they'll die on the hill of defending Other M, and that's fine. But I do think that people overall are a little too harsh on the game, because there are some really good moments there. There's even one moment where she does like authorize herself to use a power up, and she's like, "Any objections, Adam?" And then she just goes.
She should have been like that the entire game, Daniel.
That's the problem. There's only one moment like that, and if they had continued with that, where she was just like, "You know what, screw it, I'm gonna do this," then it could have taken what was like a part of the game that was irritating and actually made it work in the context of the story, like it does in Fusion. But that's not really what we got. So it's I would say, like, when I'm recommending the games to people, I just don't even really mention it, just because I'm like, well, play the Prime games, then play Zero Mission, then play Samus Returns, then play Super, then play Fusion. I sometimes just even forget that the game exists, to be honest. Oops, just because I never go and revisit it, so it's just never top of mind for me. But yeah, that's, you know, it's still not as terrible. Like, people will go down and say that it's the worst piece of media in existence, you know, that it's the Metroid equivalent of the movie The Room, you know, that it's, you know, all this stuff. And it's not that bad. It's still, I think, it has some entertaining moments to offer. So that's my bit.
Mm-hmm. To preface my opinions, I'll say I only played this game once. I picked it up for like $3 at a GameStop in like 2013. So I'm like, oh, what the heck? Because I didn't buy this game at launch because I heard all the negative opinions surrounding it.
Yeah, same.
Mm-hmm. So I picked it up, I played it, and I was like, oh, that wasn't too bad. And then the more I had discussions about it with my friends, the more I watched the cutscenes again, it's just like, yikes. Like, I know you said a lot of this was messed up in the English localization, but that doesn't make the English localization any less bad. It's, the Samus is made out to be like, there's nothing wrong with having, like, vulnerability in an especially strong character, but she's straight up, like, weak. Like, the way she talks is just, it's not confident, doesn't read confidence at all. It's very much just like, oh, the baby, oh, Adam, oh, this. And it's like, we're led to believe in Fusion that Adam was, like, this respectable person with compassion. He comes off as a total jerk throughout the entire game. Yeah. And the way he shoots Samus in the back, spoilers, whatever,
literally,
who cares? But, like, he shoots Samus in the back to protect her. That's not good writing. I'm sorry.
Is that like when Keanu Reeves shoots his partner in the leg in Speed?
Yes, but worse somehow.
Yeah.
And it was just not good. And, like, I know you said people will die on a hill to vending this game, and I'm gonna die on a hill saying those people are wrong. So wrong.
I mean,
gameplay-wise, it's okay, but gameplay-wise, I don't really have much to say about it because I need to replay it again to really get a hand on it. But all I remember is the lack of exploration. There wasn't a whole lot of exploring. It was like, it felt like more linear than Fusion, really, and that's at least what I remember. And also, graphically, like, coming off of Metroid Prime 3 to this, Yeah.
You say there wasn't a lot of exploring. I definitely remember spending 90 minutes in a freaking pixel hunt on one of those stupid areas where you have to point the pointer to the screen. I remember specifically which one. There's like you're like in a forest. You're not outside. You're like in a forest-looking area, and there's like it ended up being like a photo or something on the ground, and I don't know. It took me forever to get that, and that sucked.
That was so bad. I remember that too. I was stuck there for like, I don't even know what I was looking for. Like, I guess we found you were looking for a puddle of blood or something?
Something like
but it's like green blood on grass, I think.
Yes.
And so it's like super hard to see.
It's even worse.
Yeah. I think part of its issues is, I actually think that you guys made a video about it, was like, so much of the game, I think because they decided to set it between Super Metroid and Fusion, they put themselves in a box of how much they could do with the game's story, because they can't do too much or it'll, you know, retcon something with Fusion, and they can't do too much, they'll retcon something with Super, and so they had to, like, keep the story kind of contained, and so because of that, it just doesn't really matter. Like, the story is so inconsequential, and in some ways, it's just like Fusion done worse. Like, and actually, in many ways, it's just Fusion done worse with the story, because it kind of undercuts some of the twists of Fusion by making them already things that we know about in that context. So it's just like, I would say that's why I almost never recommend it, apart from forgetting it exists. It just it's so inconsequential to the overarching story. Like, every game explores the consequences of the previous ones. You know, apart from Zero Mission / Metroid 1, because it's the first one, but then say in Metroid 2, you know, it's basically her mission is the Federation's reaction to what happened on Zebes. They're like, okay, this can't happen again. You got to kill all the Metroids. And then, you know, in Fusion, it's like the consequences of doing that is explored in Fusion. And then, of course, the consequences of your actions on Zebes in Zero Mission is explored in Super Metroid. And, of course, and from Samus Return / Metroid 2, those consequences of sparing the baby Metroid's life, spoilers, are explored in Super. And it's all of these games are really connected well and really explore these consequences of the previous games, except for Other M. It just sort of can't do anything. So
it's there. It's just there, and
it
like,
exists.
oh hey, Samus
As
has
Andre
a PTSD. Yeah,
it exists.
Samus has a PTSD-induced anxiety attack after seeing Ridley for the 5th time.
Yeah. That makes no sense to me at all.
None whatsoever.
It is interesting to hear that the localization might have made those issues worse, but yeah, I think the biggest issues with the game, and we've all touched on, is not a surprise, is just like how they portray Samus. And I think too, it's not just that like they make her seem weak. It almost seems like sexist in how they do it, being subservient to Adam especially, and that is so, as you know, as someone saying earlier, that's so like anti what we had understood Samus to be up to that point. And I feel like, in particular, the era in which it came out, 2010, was like we were having like a kind of like realization of how women were portrayed in games around this time, and it just came out at really like the worst possible time, like pretty much at the peak of that, I feel like, or maybe not the peak, but like a key point of that. And yeah, the timing just wasn't great, and it didn't help that the gameplay wasn't horrible, it wasn't amazing, and so it's difficult to push past the narrative and story and the characterization for what's just kind of mediocre gameplay, you know? At least to my memory. I haven't played it since. Maybe it holds it better than I remember.
I think it's pretty mediocre gameplay from what I remember. It's like you hold the Wii Remote sideways.
Yeah.
And then what?
I think if the controller were better, it would have held the experience back as well, because, like, just for me, using a D-pad to navigate that 3D space is just, it feels very counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And there's, like, Super Metroid, for example, plays way better with a D-pad than, especially if you're into wall jumping and doing all these sequence breaking and shine sparking and stuff. Then it's way more intuitive to do that stuff on a D-pad. And I think that's kind of what they were trying to recapture, but it just, the Wii Remote doesn't even really have a great D-pad anyways. It's yeah, so they
you're
again,
moving in a
put themselves in a box.
Yeah, and you're moving in a 3D space most of the time, like on all the time, honestly. Like, yeah, it was a baffling decision, and to make, but they did it so they could do the first person perspective thing, and I'm like, no, that was what Prime
They could have put a button to toggle it though, like if they really wanted to.
Yeah, wasn't it? You pointed at the screen, right, to activate it? Isn't that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a cool idea, but yeah, it doesn't really work with that well in practice. I mean, to the game's credit, it's the closest we've had to the initial Metroid Prime reveal trailer, where it looked like it was going to be like a third-person type shooter, you know? And so they kind of realized some of those ideas with Other M, but, you know, not nearly as well as Prime, or as we'd hoped they would. So, yeah, it's an interesting experiment that just didn't work.
Part of it at the time, it was being framed as a way to try to make Metroid more popular, because maybe the Metroid Prime sales numbers weren't quite hitting what Nintendo thought they could, or to propel Metroid to another echelon. But yeah, in my opinion, I never played it because it was a step backwards in the series in terms of portraying Samus.
Yeah, and I think that game only sold like 500,000 copies or something. Fact check that for me, users, but yeah.
It doesn't help that the Wii's popularity was already waning by this point, like substantially. So yeah, the timing all around is bad for the game, but... Alright, I think that's enough about Other M. I think that's almost enough about Metroid. Final thoughts, everyone. Is there anything else you want to touch on that we haven't yet, or any lasting impressions of Metroid now that we're 35 years out from its original release, at least in Japan?
Yeah, I think Metroid is Nintendo's most unique franchise, period. Like, it's their most mature franchise too, I would say. It's not like it's super gory or anything. Sometimes it is, but it's definitely one that stands out amongst them, and I want to see more games from the series. So buy Metroid Dread, and I also know, like, we say buy Metroid Dread a lot, even though like the game's not out yet. We don't know how good it's gonna be, but like I know we've talked a lot about Metroid games don't really like, but there hasn't been a Metroid game that's just been downright awful. Like, Other M has probably come the closest due to its narrative and just mediocre gameplay and stuff, but the games are mediocre at best, I would say, but
at worst.
Or what?
Isn't it ringing
worst.
At worst.
Worst. Mediocre at worst. The opposite.
Yes, not me. The games are great at best.
Okay.
Joey, what have you done?
This is,
You guys
this is why
stressing me
Joey does not work in marketing for Nintendo of America.
This is why I don't. Yeah, like, I applied so many times. Doug, why don't you return my calls? But by extension, there hasn't been a bad 2D Metroid game at all. And Metroid Dread is a 2D Metroid game, and they've been working on this Metroid game for like 4 years now, like maybe 3.5. And from what I've seen from the Treehouse and from what I've seen from the trailers, this is probably gonna be like one of the best 2D Metroids. Might not have the same legacy as Super Metroid. I really don't think it will, but it'll still it's gonna be one of the best Metroids released, more likely than not.
On that note, you say 3 or 4 years, but Sakamoto-san has been working on this idea for like over a decade, and he's tried twice to make it, and had not worked out. He's gonna know the lessons from that. And he looked around for different teams he worked with. For all we know, like, he was checking out Koei Tecmo and Next Level Games to see if they could make Metroid Dread before coming across Mercury Steam. So there's that amount of time thinking behind it. I think it'll probably be really something really special. And hopefully with the Switch's great numbers and how people sometimes do like the 2D games more than 3D games, it'll be the chance to really propel Metroid sales numbers to another level so it could be considered in Mario Zelda range.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Not
I think there's a
Pokemon.
lot of
No, Pokemon. That's too much.
yeah. But I think like a lot of people have this mindset about Nintendo games, about Nintendo makes games. They don't care about story, they don't care, they just make kids games or whatever. And to both those points I say, you clearly haven't played Metroid, because it's a game that cares a lot about its story and what sort of narrative it's taking on. And it is, like Joey said, kind of a mature game. It's not gory or anything, but there's a lot of really surprisingly mature themes explored, and some just downright scary parts of some of those games. And there's a lot of tension, and it really feels like something completely different than anything else Nintendo does, period. And it's just a very special franchise that, can I remind everybody, it literally created an entire genre of games.
Yep.
And a very beloved genre of games. And so it's really something special there. And it's baffling to me that it's not more popular, because there's not really a bad Metroid game, and they're all like incredibly detailed and well designed and very thoughtful games.
Except for Hunters.
Except for Hunters, are just fine, but we had pinball, so that balances it out.
Exactly. It
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That Metroid effectively did start an entire genre, which I do find amusing that it got combined, with Castlevania, being a Metroidvania, even though Metroid invented it. I get why Castlevania introduced elements that Metroid didn't, that other games have taken inspiration from. That always just kind of amused me. But what also amuses me, something I just realized, is that just as Metroidvania is a portmanteau, right, of those two games, so is Metroid itself, of being Metroid and Android, which is something I didn't even realize until today, reading Wikipedia. I'm like, whoa, cool. even though I don't think Samus is technically an Android, but I respect it. So
She's not.
yeah, kind of a cool idea. But
She's an iPhone user, not an Android user.
Right. But the fact that Metroid is still inspiring developers and games to this day, such as with Ori and Hollow Knight, like that is, it's endless. Even the Shadow Complex on the Xbox, which is a game that I actually wish Metroid would look more to in some ways. Like, I love the controls in Shadow Complex. I'm a little bit disappointed that Dread isn't using the dual control stick method so you can aim and shoot at the same time, because I think that would be lovely. That side, though, it's amazing what Metroid has really done, and that's really cool. And it's a very exciting time for a Metroid fan. It's a 35th anniversary. We have 2 big games coming up. When Dread is announced, I'm like, this is arguably a bigger deal than Metroid Prime 4. This is the continuation of a series that we haven't had a new entry in since, even longer than Metroid Prime. And it's also of a game that we thought was canceled. Like, I love how I forget if I mentioned it earlier while we were recording, but they had almost a double reveal of the game. We've got the reveal that it's Metroid Prime 5, Metroid 5, and the reveal that it's Metroid Dread, a game that we only knew about through rumors and the rumor mill. And hey, it exists now, finally, and that's awesome. So yeah, super exciting time for a Metroid fan, and happy anniversary to a long-standing, largely great series, minus Federation Force and Hunters and Other M.
Let's not forget about another important small entry in the series, Metroid in Nintendo Land.
Yes,
Metroid
arguably the greatest Metroid game of all time. I legitimately had a blast playing that Metroid Blast, playing that game. Yeah. So good, so fun. Also, I think one of the only games you can actually fly the spaceship in yourself, Samus's gunship.
That's true.
Yep. Yeah. See, we need that. All right, Captain Bergenson, tell us more about where people can follow you at if they want to see more from you.
Yeah, well, every social media, it's all the same. It's all Cap Bergerson, and yeah, I'm probably most well known for co-hosting the podcast called the Highland Games Cast, which is a mostly, but not always, but mostly Zelda-focused podcast with my co-host Game Over Jesse. And though I do kind of do little things on his channel here and there as well, I tend to make the spicier, controversial videos that everyone hates on his channel. And otherwise, I do have my own channel, which is, again, mostly Zelda-focused, but I do talk about other stuff. Actually, my first video I ever uploaded on that channel was a Metroid video. But yeah, lately I've been just doing little Zelda videos, talking about the dungeons in games like Skyward Sword and stuff. So it's... yeah, go check me out if you like to listen to me talk, but if you don't, then I understand. Neither do I.
Yeah, just watch, then mute it.
Yeah, there you go. Just hit the mute button.
They made this far into the video, so I think you're okay.
Yeah.
So you can find links to all that in the description below, and of course, stay tuned to GameXplain for tons more on Metroid, as Dread is just around the corner, which is super exciting to say, and hopefully one day Metroid Prime 4. So with that, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll catch you later. Bye.
Metroid Dread.